city of Toronto is marking the International Day Against Homophobia, Transphobia and Biphobia. Mayor John Tory raising the Progress flag outside City Hall today, saying there is no room for hate in this city.
Toronto prides itself on something that is a fact. It's just a fact. It's not a goal. We are the most diverse city in the world. I think we're one of the most embracing and accepting cities in the world. I think that is a fact. The accepting and embracing part, we still have work to do. But where we're not yet is on being for sure the most inclusive city in the world at a standard that all of us would accept as being the gold standard, the world standard when it comes to inclusivity.
This International Day Against Homophobia, Transphobia and Biphobia is marked every year on May 17th.
Being gay is like you always have to hide who you are. It's always about worrying and watching yourself because it's not accepted. I was kidnapped from salon I was working in by soldiers with the guns, where I was tortured with other gay men for 2 weeks, expecting that I'm not gonna leave that place alive.
Every year, thousands of LGBTQI+ people from around the world reach out to Rainbow Railroad asking for help to escape violence and persecution in their home countries. Today, the organization has a special message for Canadians. Rainbow Railroad is calling on the Government of Canada to provide a safe way out of Afghanistan for hundreds of LGBTQI+ refugees and asking the public to sign a petition to support that effort. For more on this, we're joined live tonight by the Executive Director of Rainbow Railroad, Kimali Powell. Thanks so much for making time.
Thanks for having me.
I want to get right into this. From where are you getting the most requests for help?
So this year, Rainbow Railroad anticipates we'll receive 10,000 requests for help each year, and about 40% of them are coming directly from Afghanistan. We received about 4,500 requests from Afghanistan since the takeover of the Taliban. And so we're really concerned about the community and people at risk.
You know, I think a lot of people understand that there is political instability in countries like Afghanistan, but what kind of persecution are LGBTQ+ people facing in countries like that?
So we know that around the world, there are 70 countries that criminalize same-sex intimacy. And one of the things that we're finding at Rainbow Railroad is that as we see increased conflict, whether it's in Ukraine or in Afghanistan, LGBTQI+ people are at risk. And particularly in Afghanistan, what we're seeing since the takeover of the Taliban is individuals being subject to random raids, community members turning people over to the Taliban, individuals subject to individual attacks and extreme violence. And that's happening around the world in the people that request for help, but it's particularly acute in Afghanistan right now, which is why we're calling on the Canadian government to help resettle more people into the country.
Yeah, this sounds like a life or death situation for some people. So what kind of help do they need?
I mean, specifically, individuals need access to resources to keep them safe within the country. But more importantly, for those who have no other choice but to flee, we need the government of Canada to accept them and help them resettle into the country.
So we asked the government for a statement about this. I just want to read you part of it. It says, "The hard truth is that there are unique obstacles facing us in Afghanistan. We're navigating a constantly evolving situation in which the government of Canada has no military or diplomatic presence on the ground. The government of Canada will continue working to bring as many vulnerable Afghans, including LGBTQI+ people, as possible to safety in Canada as quickly as possible." So when you hear this sort of statement and messaging, what would you like to see the Canadian government do at this point, especially when they talk about how there aren't any resources on the ground to sort of solve what's happening there?
Well, that's the wonderful opportunity that's in front of us. One of the things unique about Rainbow Railroad is that we have the ability to be on the ground. We have been facilitating evacuations and safe resettlement in neighboring countries. We identified people who can be resettled into Canada. So there's two things about our petition that's important. Not just the fact that we want Canada to resettle refugees, but just as important, Rainbow Railroad has the unique ability to identify and refer people to safety. One of the things about Afghanistan is because of lack of diplomatic ties with the Taliban, civil society has had to roll up its sleeves and provide pathway support, which is why it's a huge opportunity for the government of Canada to work with us to identify people at risk so that they can resettle into Canada.
So I know that you guys are launching this petition, Kamali. Can you talk about the impact that you hope it has? What happens once you collect these signatures?
You know, I've had the opportunity to speak to various members of parliament, the Minister of Immigration, and I know for sure that they're working as hard as they can to provide support to LGBTQI plus persons, including in Afghanistan. And we need to do more. What we're saying specifically is that we've identified 300 people who can be resettled into Canada right now. We've done the work of identifying them, ensuring that they're safe, and all that needs to be done is the government of Canada using the authority they have to help them resettle quickly. That's one immediate, tangible step on today, the International Day Against Homophobia, Biphobia, Transphobia, that the government of Canada can do, which is why we launched the petition today. This is immediate action that can save the lives of hundreds of people.
A really important conversation. Kamali Pal, thanks so much for your time on this. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Canada's inflation rate hit a 3-decade high in April. Stats Canada says the annual rate of inflation hit 6.8% last month, with food and gas prices among the biggest increases. Food prices were up 9.7% year over year, the biggest jump since 1981. Gas prices were up more than 36% over last April. Shelter costs increased by 7.4%, the fastest pace since 1983. Meanwhile, stocks closed sharply lower on Wall Street today amid renewed fears that inflation is hurting U.S. companies. The Dow sank more than 1,100 points, or 3.5%. The S&P 500 dropped 4%, and the Nasdaq tumbled closer to 5%. The losses here in Toronto were not as steep, but the TSX still fell nearly 400 points, or 1.9%. Joining us live tonight is business journalist and founder of All Caps Content, Brian Borzakowski, along with the president and CEO of the Ontario Chamber of Commerce, Rocco Rossi. Brian, let's start with you. Nerves tested today, no doubt, on the market, with a huge drop for the Dow, as you just talked about, in the worst day since the start of the pandemic. What's the takeaway here for investors?
Yeah, this is for sure tough. It's been a tough year. Year to date, the Nasdaq's down close to 30%. The S&P 500 close to 20%. We're getting into real bear market territory here, and that is obviously troubling for people who are looking at their portfolio. My advice is don't look at your portfolio. Over time, stocks increase, and there are times where they go up. There are times when they go down. And yes, this is in a particularly difficult period. But if you keep your view on your retirement goals, on your long-term goals, hopefully by the time you retire, things will get better. Retirees for sure are on a tighter budget now, but you just got to kind of stay the course and hope for the best, because if you sell out and panic, you never know when to get back in, and you'll miss that upswing when it does eventually come.
So, Rocco, with all this in mind, the Ontario Chamber is putting out a call to the provincial political parties today. You say the economy is at stake this election. Explain what you want to hear from the provincial party leaders.
Look, at small business in particular is still reeling from COVID and will take some time to recover. We're seeing bankruptcies going up as costs rise, and the ability to pass on price is constrained. So what you want is to rebuild confidence. And number one is do no harm. Add no new taxes, new costs, new burdens onto businesses and consumers that are already reeling from these costs. And what can you do to accelerate growth in the economy, and especially productivity growth? Because all of us would like to earn more, have higher wages, but if that doesn't come with higher productivity, output for all of the time that we spend, then those costs simply then get passed on to the consumer, and inflation then eats it away, which is the cycle that we desperately want to avoid.
And so, Rocco, just to follow up, do you feel the affordability crisis is so far largely being ignored on the campaign trail?
Well, aside from a few odds and sods of announcements, there is no systemic economic plan that would center on both affordability and growth. And that's what we'd like to see: a lot more time spent, a lot more focus by all the parties.
Brian, a 3-decade high in Canada's inflation rate for the average consumer, just seeing what it means when they have to go buy pretty much everything from gas to groceries. Explain what's fueling the ongoing surge.
Yeah, well, there's a few things. I mean, number one, demand is picking up after the pandemic. People are getting out more, so people want more stuff. So that's causing prices to rise. But we're really seeing a lot of this happening because of the Ukraine crisis. Oil prices have risen, and energy costs work their way through almost everything. I mean, you need to ship goods from one place to another. You need fuel, you need gas. And so it's not just people driving their cars, to their cottages. It's businesses trying to ship goods. So that goes into increasing costs. And same thing with labor costs. The labor market is very tight right now. Well, wages are rising, not as fast as inflation, which is, another problem. That means people aren't making as much as prices are rising, but labor costs are rising. That gets factored into the price. You're not going to have people reducing their wages in the future. You can reduce wages through, technological improvements and productivity improvements, but those are some of the things that are causing prices to climb. And it doesn't appear that that's going away anytime soon. We just saw wheat prices shoot up because that's been constrained because of the Ukraine crisis. And then India just put a ban on exports. They were kind of filling a gap there. So we saw that increase. So that should probably work its way. So there's so many things going on. It's a global market. And so it's hard for, politicians or people to do much here because a lot of this is impacted by global forces.
Rocco, what are you hearing are the biggest concerns for businesses if more isn't done to make life more affordable?
Well, as I noted before, you're seeing an uptick in bankruptcies already. And this will increase now that supports have been ended, while people's businesses have not returned to pre-pandemic levels. Let's not forget there's really kind of two economies out there. There is the segment that over the course of the pandemic in technology and essential services and construction, despite some bumps in the road, did quite well, whereas those who've been in tourism, in hospitality, in personal services, in live music, have been hit hard from the beginning and are very slow to come back. We're facing significant labor shortages in key areas, skilled trades, a backlog in immigration, particularly with skilled labor. You're seeing supply chain blockages in a number of key areas, from microchips to now food and fuel because of the war in Ukraine, but it was predating that, as Brian has pointed out. There are a number of factors at work. So what we're calling on the government is, again, don't pile on. There are some things that are out of your control, but there are many things in your control. So don't be adding costs, adding taxes, adding fees, adding complexity. Help to rebuild confidence in the economy so that we can grow out of this.
So, Brian, finally, the question we all want to know: can we as consumers expect any relief anytime soon?
If I could predict that, I'd be a lot wealthier than I just should be. But it's hard to know because all of these global forces are still impacting prices. If the war ends and things go back to some sort of normalcy, then maybe things, supply chains can get back going. But I think that's a far ways away. We don't even know what things will look like after that happens. There are still issues in China with lockdowns. They're not as open as we are. So that's a major manufacturing center there. So that's impacting the supply chain as well. So I think there's still a long way to go here. Hopefully, these are year-over-year numbers. So, maybe when we get to next year, hopefully the increase won't be as high. Maybe we're at a base now, but it's hard to tell. If I've learned anything, it's not to predict the future, and so I'm not going to try.
All right, we'll leave it at that. Brian Borzakowski and Rocco Rossi, thanks so much for joining us tonight. Joining us live tonight on our political panel, John Capobianco, Senior VP and Senior Partner at Fleischman Hillard High Road. Kim Wright, principal and founder of Wright Strategies, and Brian Dechu, consultant at Crestview Strategies. So Kim, I want to start with you. This is quite a curveball. How do you see it changing the strategy for the two leaders in particular who are now isolating?
Yeah, and Andrea Horwath has actually been running a full leaders campaign, a full leaders tour, and she was about to go through a Northern Ontario swing. So is it problematic? Yep. Is it the end of the world? Probably would have been a couple of years ago, but we've all learned how to have precautions on top of precautions, and not to quote Friends, but we all learned how to pivot. So look, it is unfortunate. You saw earlier today she was still taking media interviews. She was at an event in Sault Ste. Marie, although they just rolled her in on the video screen. So it's strange times. We've all had to make adjustments, but the most important thing between now and the next, till June 2nd is people are now casting ballots. The campaigns are really focused on get out the vote strategies, and Andrea is still there talking to Ontarians. She is on Zoom calls with campaigns. She is lighting up the phone lines to supporters and really doing what she does best, which is talking to people where they're at.
And as you mentioned, of course, advanced polling is open. And yes, we've all had to pivot. We've all, of course, as you can see on our TV screen, become very familiar with Zoom and FaceTime. So, John, do you see all of this at all affecting voters' attitudes? Affordability has emerged as the hot topic this campaign, with two leaders going down with COVID. Do you think pandemic issues might move back up the list of priorities for voters?
Well, it certainly became an issue, and it's unfortunate that both Ms. Horwath and Mr. Schreiner got COVID. Obviously, the fact that they've been fully boosted and had all their shots and took as precautions as much as they could over the course of the last number of years probably gave them sort of the mild symptoms, and the fact that they can still speak to voters. I think a lot of the campaigns would have taken some precaution, knowing that this could be a situation. And I remember the federal election campaign that happened in the middle of COVID, the pandemic, when Aaron O'Toole, his campaign team actually had a media studio just for that reason. In the event that something happened, he was able to kind of communicate with voters. So I'm sure that what you're seeing with Andrea Horwath and with Mike Schreiner is that they're going to be probably holed up at their various locations for the last little while. But as far as the issue of the pandemic, I think Ontarians, much like many Canadians, are just tired of it. I think they understand that it's going to be there. There's a new variant that's coming around. There's all sorts of things. But I think the vast majority of Ontarians are vaccinated or fully boosted. There's fourth shots that are going around now. As many Ontarians are trying to get that as possible. People are wearing masks where they can, especially in public settings. So I think they want to move on to that and talk about what's affecting their pocketbook issues, which is gas prices and grocery store prices. And that's what I think what this campaign is going to be about.
So, Brian, what are the conversations today in the Liberal and PC camps reacting to this news, of course, also testing themselves and many of their staff members? How do they then capitalize on two other leaders being at home?
Well, first I would say no one in the Liberal camp was hoping that anyone on a rival campaign would catch COVID. It's very unfortunate. It's terrible luck. To John's point, many of us were done with COVID, but I guess COVID isn't done with us. And 2 out of the 4 leaders testing positive in the last 24 hours, not too long after a debate in a rather, what we might say now was quite a small room, is a reminder of that. But all the leaders were following protocols, continue to follow protocol, Del Duca included, with frequent testing. They were all tested this morning in Del Duca's camp and tested negative, which allows them to continue their in-person events. But no one on the Liberal team was hoping for this. This is quite unfortunate, but it's the realities of campaigning in the COVID era.
Of course, health and safety for all the candidates and their staff is the top priority for everyone. Kim, Nanos polling for CP24 and CTV shows NDP support slipping. How do they turn that around now with 2 weeks to go as they kind of pivot their campaign?
It really is going back to old school campaigning. And look, New Democrats love nothing more than a good old fashioned ground game, door to door, person to person. And what a gift almost in an election that it could charitably be called a little boring, at least in comparison to what's happening in Alberta with the UCP or the Conservative federal leadership. What your get out the vote strategy is and getting those voters identified and into the ballot box is critical. And one of the things that Andrea Horwath and the New Democrats have really invested in over the last couple of years has been in those ridings where we are going toe-to-toe with conservatives, because that's who our real enemy is here, enemy in the pejorative sense. But our real focus is places like Etobicoke Lakeshore, places like Cambridge, which the current MPP left the Conservative Party her and her husband started their own new Blue Party, which is running a full slate of candidates. We're also looking at places like Ottawa West Nepean, which is Lisa MacLeod's riding, and we're really quite focused on all of those key areas.
Yeah, of course, the leaders do not make up the entire campaign. There's candidates, and candidates have their own staff, so a lot of door knocking can still be done. John, same polling shows the PC holding steady with the lead. What's the strategy to keep it that way? The old sports cliche is sometimes, it's hard to stay at the top.
Well, and I've said this before, where polls are a snapshot in time, and no one takes them for granted, and certainly not Doug Ford and the PCs, who are working hard right to the very end. And Kim mentioned my riding of Etobicoke Lakeshore, and I'll tell you, my local candidate, Christine Hogarth, is working extremely hard, and I look forward to having her reelected on June the 2nd. But, I think this is the sort of the last milestone, if you will, of a campaign. There's a couple of milestones that you have every campaign. One is the launch, 2 are the debates, 3 is advanced polls, which really does lead into the final stretch of the campaign, which is 2 weeks today. And I think a lot of the campaigns are going to be working on their get out to vote, as Kim said. And I think the Conservatives are going to just keep playing their strategy, which is get out there, talk to people. Doug Ford speaks to issues that matter to Ontarians, especially when it comes to pocketbook issues and cost of living issues. And a lot of the issues coming out of the debate, I think, really gave some wind in his sails, especially because we saw some polls who a lot of Ontarians who did watch the debate saw that he had won the debate, or at least came across as the most premier-like person in that debate. And that follows with some of the trade unions that are getting his support, which is why I think the NDP are not doing so well. Because really the fight was the second place between the NDP and the Liberals, and they fall into the 3rd place now. But there's still a lot of time, and the campaigns matter, and every day in an election campaign can be a week or a month's worth of time.
So, Brian, on the same token, what do the Liberals need to do to chip away at the PC lead with 2 weeks left until Election Day?
Over the last few weeks, the Liberals have done a great job in terms of identifying their voters and energizing their voters. But the last step is to mobilize their voters. We all know that elections are won and lost on Election Day. All these events that these politicians hold, all these fundraisers, all these social media posts that get traction, that get retweets, that get likes, they're all fantastic. Getting people to attend your events is great. Getting people to donate to your party is amazing. But at the end of the day, it's our votes that elect governments and not our retweets. So for the Liberals, it will be about making sure that the people that they've reached out to in the different ways that they have go out to vote. We know that elections with lower voter turnouts are usually good for incumbent governments. The polls seem to suggest that this won't be a change election, but for the Liberals, it's their responsibility to make sure that as many people go out to the polls as possible, so that we do see a turnout that is comparable to what we saw in 2018, which was a 20-year record high. So for the Liberals, it's to make sure that to keep on knocking on doors and to make sure that everyone that they've reached out to and people that they may have not already reached out to go out and show up to the polls.
And certainly the Liberals have an additional challenge. Every media outlet and pollster is reporting that Stephen Del Duca is not likely to reclaim his seat. Viewers will remember he lost that seat to Minister Tobolo in 2018. And there's nothing I'm seeing that is indicating a resurgence of Stephen Del Duca to the legislature. So, he made some crack, a lame knockoff of Jack Layton's commentary about showing up to work and being rewarded. Stephen Del Duca still doesn't have a seat in the House and not likely to have it. So I think Liberals are asking themselves, and certainly I'm hearing from Liberals, they're already talking about the next leadership right after Election Day if Stephen doesn't win that seat.
All right, 2 weeks till Election Day. We have to leave it there tonight. John Capobianco, Kim Wright, and Brian Detchu, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having us.